What if the strongest bonds aren't forged by blood but by compassion? Imagine raising a wild lynx from a tiny, helpless cub, nurturing it, teaching it to trust, and preparing it for a life in the wild. But when the time comes to let go, will it remember you? Too often, rescued animals lose their connection to the wild or struggle to survive. But this story is different. Through patience and respect, one man gave a lynx the tools to embrace its true nature. A year later, the unexpected happened, the lynx returned, and what followed will leave you speechless. Sometimes, letting go is the ultimate act of love. Hi everyone, welcome to our channel. Today, I'm excited to share a new story with you. Please subscribe us. It was a quiet autumn morning when Ethan stumbled across a sight that would change his life. Wandering through the dense forest near his cabin, he noticed a faint, pitiful sound, a soft, almost pleading cry. Following it, he found a tiny lynx cub, barely more than a few weeks old, huddled under a fallen log. Its fur was matted, its frame emaciated, and its once bright eyes clouded with exhaustion. Ethan's heart ached at the sight. He had spent years observing wildlife, but this was different. This cub wasn't just surviving, it was teetering on the brink of death. The mother was nowhere in sight, and predators would soon close in if he didn't act quickly. Carefully wrapping the frail creature in his jacket, Ethan carried it home, knowing full well the risks. Raising a wild animal was no small feat, and rehabilitating one for the wild required patience, skill, and an unshakable sense of purpose. Yet as he looked into the cub's weary eyes, he made a decision: he would do whatever it took to give this little lynx a second chance. Little did Ethan know, this moment would mark the beginning of an extraordinary bond that would challenge and redefine his understanding of nature and connection. In the first weeks, the lynx cub's survival hung by a thread. Ethan dedicated his days and nights to ensuring its well-being, setting up a small, warm corner in his cabin with blankets and a heating pad to replicate the warmth of a mother's body. Feeding was a delicate task. The cub, too weak to nurse properly, relied on a formula administered drop by drop through a syringe. Ethan sat for hours, coaxing it to drink, his patience never wavering. The cub's trust was not immediate. At first, it cowered at every movement, its instincts screaming to flee despite its frailty. Ethan respected its boundaries, moving slowly and speaking in low, soothing tones. Over time, the cub began to relax, its small, round ears twitching less at unfamiliar sounds. The first breakthrough came on a cold morning when Ethan reached out to adjust the cub's blankets, and it didn't flinch. Instead, it tilted its tiny head, studying him with cautious curiosity. That day marked the start of their bond. Soon after, the cub took its first unsteady steps across the cabin floor. Its awkward movements were a stark contrast to the grace lynxes are known for, but Ethan cheered it on with quiet encouragement. Each wobbly stride was a victory, a testament to its growing strength and trust. By the end of the first month, the cub began following Ethan around the cabin, its fluffy tail bobbing behind it. It still had a long way to go, but its playful pounces on a ball of yarn and soft, inquisitive mews were signs of progress. With every step forward, Ethan marveled at the resilience of this tiny creature and the bond they were beginning to share. As the weeks turned into months, the tiny lynx cub grew stronger, shedding its frailty and embracing the playful curiosity of youth. Its once patchy fur filled in, soft and thick, marked with the distinctive spots and tufted ears of its species. Ethan watched in awe as the cub transformed, its vibrant energy a stark contrast to the timid, malnourished creature he had first carried home. The cabin became a playground. The cub, now named Coda, pounced on everything in sight: loose socks, dangling cords, and even Ethan's unsuspecting boots. One afternoon, Ethan found himself in a tug-of-war over his favorite beanie, Coda growling in mock ferocity as Ethan tried, unsuccessfully, to reclaim it. Laughter filled the small space, a sound that seemed to lift the spirits of both man and lynx. As Coda grew, so did the need to prepare him for the wild. Ethan began introducing survival skills, guiding Coda through the dense forests surrounding the cabin. He would hide scraps of meat under rocks or in trees, encouraging Coda to sniff them out. At first, Coda was baffled, pawing at the ground in frustration. But with time, his instincts sharpened, and he began to stalk and pounce with the precision of a true predator. Ethan also built climbing structures around the cabin, using fallen logs and sturdy branches to mimic the lynx's natural environment. Coda took to them with gusto, scaling the makeshift platforms and leaping down with an agility that left Ethan marveling. It was in these moments, watching Coda flourish, that Ethan felt a mix of pride and melancholy. Each skill mastered brought them closer to the inevitable day when Coda would leave. Despite the lessons, there was still room for moments of tenderness. Coda often sought Ethan's company in the quiet evenings, curling up at his feet while he read by the fire. Ethan would sometimes reach down to stroke Coda's soft fur, and though the lynx often pretended to tolerate it begrudgingly, the contented purr rumbling from his chest betrayed him. These days were filled with joy, humor, and a deepening bond. Coda was no longer just a rescued cub, he was a companion, a reminder of nature's resilience and beauty. But in Ethan's heart, he knew the forest would soon call Coda back, and he steeled himself for the bittersweet moment when he would have to let him go. As the seasons passed, Coda transformed into a majestic lynx, a far cry from the fragile cub Ethan had once cradled in his arms. His sleek coat gleamed under the sun, the rich patterns of spots and tufts framing his fierce, intelligent gaze. His movements, once clumsy and hesitant, were now deliberate and powerful, a predator honed by instinct and the careful guidance of his human companion. Ethan had poured his heart into Coda's development, teaching him to hunt, climb, and survive in the wild. The once playful moments in the cabin had given way to more structured lessons in the forest. Coda thrived in this new environment, navigating the dense undergrowth with grace and stalking small prey with precision. Each success brought Ethan pride, but also a quiet pang in his chest. The bond they shared remained strong. Coda still returned to the cabin each evening, his deep purrs filling the quiet space as he curled up by Ethan's side. Yet, there were signs of change. Coda's time away grew longer, his forays into the wild stretching into hours, then days. Ethan knew what it meant. Coda was answering the call of his nature, the instinct to explore and claim a territory of his own. Ethan found himself wrestling with conflicting emotions. He had always known this day would come. It was, after all, the goal of everything he had worked toward. But the thought of saying goodbye to the creature who had become such a profound part of his life filled him with an ache he hadn't anticipated. As Coda sat perched on a rock one evening, surveying the horizon, Ethan watched with a bittersweet smile. Coda was no longer just a lynx raised by a man, he was a symbol of resilience, freedom, and the unbreakable bond they had shared. Ethan stood at the edge of the forest, Coda by his side, as the golden light of dawn filtered through the trees. The lynx, now a striking figure of strength and grace, scanned the wilderness ahead, his tufted ears twitching at the sounds of the forest waking up. Ethan's heart felt heavy, torn between his love for Coda and the knowledge that the lynx belonged here, in the wild, not confined to the walls of a cabin. The decision to release Coda hadn't come easily. For months, Ethan had prepared himself for this moment, yet doubts lingered. Would Coda be able to hunt enough to survive? Would he find his place among the other predators? Ethan had done everything he could to equip Coda with the skills he needed, but the uncertainty gnawed at him. Coda seemed to sense the shift in the air. He turned to Ethan, his piercing eyes locking onto his caretaker's, as if asking for reassurance. Ethan crouched down, resting a hand on Coda's shoulder. "You're ready," he whispered, his voice steady despite the ache in his chest. As Ethan released his hold, Coda lingered for a moment, nuzzling his head against Ethan's hand, a rare gesture of affection. Then, with a final glance back, the lynx padded into the underbrush, his movements silent and sure. Ethan watched until Coda disappeared, the forest swallowing him whole. A part of him hoped the lynx would return, but he knew this was the right choice. The forest was Coda's home, and Ethan's role had always been to guide him back to it. As he turned to walk away, he carried the hope that Coda would thrive, free and wild, just as nature intended. A year had passed since Ethan had last seen Coda, and the memory of their final goodbyes still lingered in his mind. The forest had taken on a new meaning for Ethan, a place of both loss and hope. Today, he returned to the release site, his boots crunching softly against the undergrowth as he scanned the familiar surroundings. He carried no expectations. Wild animals, especially lynxes, rarely retain bonds with humans once reintroduced to their natural habitat. Still, he couldn't help but wonder, did Coda remember him? Did the lynx ever think about the man who had been his companion, his caretaker, his bridge to freedom? The forest was quiet, save for the rustle of leaves and the distant calls of birds. Ethan found himself at the rock where Coda had perched the day of his release. He sat down, running his hand over the cool surface, a bittersweet smile tugging at his lips. A sudden movement in the trees caught his attention. He froze, his eyes scanning the foliage. At first, he thought it might be his imagination, but then he saw it, a flash of tawny fur, moving with deliberate grace. It was Coda. The lynx emerged cautiously, his golden eyes fixed on Ethan. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Ethan didn't move, unsure of how Coda would react after all this time. Then, to his astonishment, the lynx stepped closer, his movements slow but purposeful. Coda stopped a few feet away, his gaze unwavering. Ethan's heart raced, a mixture of disbelief and joy flooding through him. Without thinking, he extended a hand, palm up, just as he had done when Coda was a cub. To his amazement, Coda leaned in, his nose brushing against Ethan's hand in a gesture so familiar it brought tears to Ethan's eyes. The lynx chuffed softly, a low, affectionate sound, before circling him with an air of calm recognition. For several minutes, man and lynx shared the moment in silence, a bond rekindled against all odds. Then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, Coda turned and padded back into the trees, pausing only once to glance back. Ethan watched him disappear, his heart full. Coda hadn't just survived, he had thrived. And in that brief encounter, he had answered Ethan's unspoken question, he remembered. As Ethan walked away from the forest that day, a profound sense of fulfillment settled over him. The journey with Coda had been one of challenges, joy, and immeasurable growth, both for the lynx and for himself. Watching Coda thrive in the wild was the ultimate affirmation of everything Ethan had hoped for, a testament to resilience, trust, and the unspoken bond that had formed between them. Their story wasn't just about a man raising a lynx, it was about the intricate connection between humans and the natural world. It was a reminder that while humans have the power to protect and nurture, true respect lies in letting go when the time is right. Ethan thought about the broader implications of their journey. Coda's survival wasn't just a victory for one animal, it was a symbol of what could be achieved through compassionate conservation efforts. It underscored the delicate balance between intervention and freedom, and the importance of preserving habitats so that wild creatures like Coda could live as they were meant to, free and untamed. Though their paths had diverged, the lessons Ethan learned from Coda would stay with him forever. In helping the lynx find his place in the wild, Ethan had also found his own purpose. If this story touched your heart, hit the like button and subscribe to our channel.